Awesome. How's it going, by the way?
Yeah, it's not bad. I've been recently traveling, so I'm still recovering from all that. But yeah, how about you?
Yeah, not bad either. Trying to think what we've been up to. We've just been pushing some new releases into session, so that's always a bit stressful. We're like overhauling the groups system. So that's going to go live tomorrow morning, I think. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens when it goes live.
So how long have you been doing session?
I've been working at Session for 7 years or 7.5 years now. So, I'm one
Oh,
of the founders, so a very long time.
yeah, that's like completely full time. Like this is all of your life at the moment, I assume.
Pretty much, yeah. I worked a little
Oh,
bit in like like software network security industry beforehand, but pretty much my whole professional life has been working on Session and decentralized tech.
nice. That's interesting. So, uh, I don't want to ask you any personal questions, but like, how soon did you get into session? Like, how much were you into your own career, or what were you doing when you decided to do the session thing?
Yeah, so I was studying computer science at university at the time, and one
Mm-hmm.
of my lecturers mentioned Bitcoin and like crypto in passing. And I started going to these crypto meetups where I met all of the other co-founders of Session, and like we saw a lot of the decentralized tech that was being built at the time. So stuff like Tor, stuff like Bitmessage, and then some of the private like cryptocurrencies as well. So like Monero and Zcash. And we wanted to like combine a bunch of those together. So we started that in 2018, and I was a year and a half into university, and I deferred my course. But yeah, the deferment has lasted 7 years, and I think they have a cutoff as well, so I can't go back at this point. I'd have to restart my course. So
Okay. Um, and what inspires you about Bitcoin? How soon was this into like how old Bitcoin was it when you heard of it for the first time?
So I think this would have been in when I heard about it the first time was like in 2011, I think, when it
Oh,
had this
pretty soon.
big it had this big run up to like $1,400 or something, and it was everyone was saying like the Chinese like miners or something. That's the reason that it was running up, and at that point I like got into it and I tried to purchase Bitcoin via Mt. Gox, but I didn't have a credit card
Mm.
at the time because I was under 18. So there was this like method that you would use, which is like you would buy the second life currency. I think it's called Sylvan or something like that. You would then send the second life currency to Mt. Gox and then trade the second life currency for Bitcoin and then withdraw it from Mt. Gox. And I remember trying this process, but they like blocked me halfway through and didn't allow me to buy Bitcoin. So that was the first time I heard about it. But I got reintroduced to it through that lecture where my we were doing like a asymmetric encryption lecture, and I think on one of the slides the lecturer was talking about like interesting applications of asymmetric encryption, and they were talking about how Bitcoin was built using like public-private key encryption, and that was an interesting kind of real-world use case. I remember hearing that and then like getting back into Bitcoin, so like deep diving again. And that's when that was probably in 2016, I think, when I started to get back into it again.
Hmm. Well, I also got into Bitcoin pretty quickly, but I wasn't really interested in the price at all. I was mostly thinking of the concept because Bitcoin came out in 2008, and it was like right at a cusp of the financial crisis and Greek falling out. And what happened then was that people were not able to withdraw their own money. And I understood Bitcoin to be this idea where people would be in control in a way they would be able to hold irresponsible banks to at least some form of a accountability or market mechanism or something like that. That if a bank is insolvent due to the like I don't know, like bad management and stuff, then people would actually have some control over their money, and that was actually stripped away from them through the modern financial system. And I hope that Bitcoin would try to do that, but then over the years, it became clear to me that it was kind of like losing that mission, and almost everybody is now focused on the next milestone, which is just the price. And I don't see that much adoption or implementation of Bitcoin into this empowerment tool where people would be able to hold banks accountable or have control over their own money. So I don't know, like my takes on Bitcoin and crypto are kind of like on both sides of the spectrum. I on the one hand adore the concepts and ideas, some of them, at least, some of the concepts. But on the other hand, I feel like there was just a lot of push to just get out of this with as much money as possible for certain people, scheming and all that stuff. But we don't have to get into that. It's kind of like not really important. Although I will have some questions regarding what Session is doing, because there is some cryptocurrency there too.
Broadly agree with you though. Like Bitcoin, at least the white paper, says that it's meant to be like peer-to-peer electronic cash, and it hasn't really fulfilled that requirement. It's more become like a kind of a store of value, like more similar to gold, where people just like hoard their wealth in there and then hope that it appreciates over time. That's an interesting use case, but I think the peer-to-peer cash thing is actually an even like more interesting use case. And I think actually we have seen some adoption of that, but it's not in Bitcoin. It's more in stable coins like USDC or USDT. But these like stable coins are quite far away from being decentralized. Like they have functions where you can blacklist people's addresses. So, it hasn't achieved the full vision of peer-to-peer cash either. But it has kind of at least allowed people to transact like with very, very low fees across borders, mostly permissionlessly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and then it's just decentralized even too much. Like there is so many coin projects out there and tokens, and all of them are focusing on one particular aspect of being money, but none of them are doing it comprehensively. And that's like one of the reasons why I like Monero, but Monero isn't all the way there either. There are problems with Monero too, and but I think it's at least try to stay focused on the mission of becoming a cash or digital cash or a currency that people can use on a daily basis. But it's still kind of like, well, at least I like that it sticks to that principle. But let's get back to Session. So or you also, because what I'm interested in before I start talking about what people do, I want to know why they're doing it. I want to know their convictions or beliefs, I don't know, political ideas or ideologies. So what is it that you have that you think drives you, or maybe it changes over time? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be like a strict answer. But for as long as you are comfortable talking about this, do you have any worldviews that you think are motivating you or driving you to do this?
Yeah, I think like broadly speaking, I would identify like with kind of crypto anarchists or like cypherpunks, in terms of building systems which are technologically secure and, create these spaces online where you don't have the ability for third parties to intervene in those spaces. I think I also have like a bit of a libertarian streak as well, running through that. And I think that motivates my passion in terms of like building secure and decentralized technology, because you're kind of creating these spaces on the internet which are separate from spaces in the physical world where you're governed by certain rules. They kind of create these meta spaces, I suppose you would call it, where you can enhance user freedom and privacy, and also just like emulate properties which you would traditionally see when you're having like normal conversations in real life. Like if I go down to the park with you and we chat together, there's no record of that conversation, unless there's like a microphone or something, so someone's bugging it. And the contents of that conversation are secure. No one else can know except for us what was, conversed in that conversation. So I think like that is kind of what Session is trying to achieve, is to try and bring something that exists in the physical world, but bring it up into like, the internet age, and kind of try to minimize as much as possible, like the metadata, the content of that conversation being leaked to third parties.
That's interesting. A lot of projects are now trying to do something like that to bring privacy into digital communication. So, what do you think Session is doing? And I also want to follow up with, do you think it's necessary for yet another project to be there, or would it be better to just support things that are already out there?
Well, I think like Session is building quite a unique network structure. We have this network of 2,200 nodes, which is operated by the community, which stores and routes messages in Session. So it's not just another centralized messaging application. And in that, on that side, there isn't really anything that is like Session in terms of, having that decentralized network which stores and routes messages, and then also having like a very user-friendly application that people can download on iOS, Android, desktop, to be able to message over that system. So certainly when we started it in 2018, there was nothing like that. And I still don't see anything like that currently available. There are kind of projects that are working in different directions, but I think we're the only ones that are building this kind of broad-based, decentralized component to the network.
Okay. So what if somebody points a gun to your head and says you must, well, that's kind of like my next idea. Like, okay, so I know there are problems with centralized things, and we should talk about those to people, to the audiences. They don't all know the difference between centralized and decentralized. But what if somebody pointed a gun to your head, and what's the worst case scenario that could happen?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's where Session differentiates itself from a lot of other messaging apps. It's like if someone points a gun to my head and says like, give us user data, or like tell us who this user is, because the developers that work on Session don't run the infrastructure that Session stores and routes messages through, I don't actually have access to any users' messages or like any of the servers that store and route users' messages. So the most that I can really like tell someone is like, oh, this is how the system is built. These are maybe where some of the weak points are, but I don't have access to those servers. Whereas like if you look at a centralized messaging application, even if it's end-to-end encrypted, if someone puts a gun to the head of the developers of that application, all of the messages are flowing through their centralized server. So it's easy for them to go to the centralized server, and if the messages are end-to-end encrypted, they can't see the contents, but they can maybe see a lot of the metadata which is involved when a user sends a message. So especially stuff like users' IP addresses if they're not using a VPN. So when you send a message to say Telegram or WhatsApp, you're actually like interacting, your IP address is interacting directly with their centralized server. And then the recipient of that message is also interacting directly with their centralized server and pulling that message down. So like from that perspective, they can look at their centralized servers and say, this IP address sent this message at this time, and then this IP address retrieved that message at this time. So even though they may not know the contents of the message, they can still form a very good picture of like who is talking to who. And Session doesn't, or the developers who work on Session or myself, like don't have that same ability, which I think is where Session like really differentiates itself.
All right, so let's pull an example from the real world. Let's say that I assume that you know all about the technical capability notice sent to Apple from the United Kingdom government, and basically requiring them to build a backdoor into advanced data protection for iCloud users, which is an end-to-end encryption feature for Apple customers using iCloud. And that could happen to any company that has any customer presence or market presence in the UK, according to the law. And that could also happen to Signal, to Google, or to Session. So let's say that order has been served or is being served or will be served to Session. And it is the exact same order. Let's say they will tell you, we want you to give us clear text access to encrypted content of the messages of your users. You are not allowed to talk to the public. You're not allowed to say publicly anything about this. And while you appeal to our judge, you have to comply before the judge rules one way or another. So what can you do, and what would you do in this case?
I think the response that kind of Apple gave is the response that, you know, Signal and Session and other messaging applications should give. And, you know, if I were to be put in that situation, would be the response that we would give as well, which is we would prefer to not be accessible via, like, for UK users than to put in a backdoor into the application. So, you know, that would just be the case of like going into the Google Play Store, going into the Apple Store, and like not allowing UK users to like download the application. So, I mean, you can't really do too much in that situation. You can only like, you know, block people from accessing the application by limiting it in the app stores. And that, I mean, Apple is still allowing UK users to use iCloud, but they've just basically like turned off the data encryption feature and don't offer it anymore in the UK. And, you know, Signal has said similar things as well. It's like, if we were forced to comply with this, we would just pull the app from the UK app stores.
That's interesting, because I was reading through this, making an analysis on this on my channel, and what I've seen is that some experts are saying that this is actually not enough to comply with the law. That it's not that you have an end-to-end encryption feature that has some customers from the UK. It is that you have any customers from the UK that might or might not be using that end-to-end encryption feature. It doesn't matter. But that you are offering that end-to-end encryption feature anywhere else in the world, they want to go after this, because the notice was so broad that it wasn't just confined to the UK citizens or residents. It was going after anyone or anywhere in the world. It could request information on a key account on an S&P 500 company in the US or anywhere else. And yeah, so what's your comment on that?
Session is like fundamentally like the I guess company that publishes the Session application is the Session Technology Foundation, which is based in Switzerland. So it has to comply with Swiss law, and Swiss law like expressly prevents you know, inserting backdoors into applications, like giving up user data, unless there is a Swiss court order which, you know, says that you have to do that. But then there's constitutional protections in the Swiss constitution which define like how far things can go on that side in terms of like the data that you have access to. The Session Foundation doesn't like have access to that data, so it wouldn't be able to give that data anyway. But this kind of gets into like legal minutiae, and I'm not a lawyer, so I should say that on the upfront. But my understanding is that the Swiss law would override like the UK law in this scenario. So the Session Foundation is, you know, situated in Switzerland and primarily has to follow Swiss law first. So pulling the application from the UK app stores, I don't think would violate any you know, Swiss jurisdictional law, in my understanding. And then if they were to, you know, send requests to us to insert a backdoor into the application, the, you know, Session Foundation, I think, wouldn't be able to comply with that request and still comply with Swiss law. So I think it wouldn't be possible, essentially.
That's very interesting. I mean, we can hypothesize a lot about what other companies have been served this, because it couldn't have been just Apple, and how all of this got leaked anyway, because Apple was not allowed to talk about it. And interestingly enough, they actually haven't talked about it. They just made these vague statements, and they made the decision to pull, but they never said that it was because of that law. But obviously we know, but only because of the leak. So it's all speculation.
Yeah, it really gets tricky in these scenarios, because to what extent does one country have jurisdiction over another country? You know, like, is the UK allowed to tell a US app developer what they can publish in their application? It starts to get into kind of international law and how that's enforced as well. And yeah, it would be interesting to see how something like this develops, especially they probably come after Signal first, I imagine, because it's a larger messaging application. But Signal's a US based 501c, 501(c). So I don't think that there is an ability to enforce some of these requirements against Signal, for example. And I think, if they weren't able to enforce it against Signal, I don't know, to what extent they're able to make you violate your own country's law, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. But you said about that the solution to this from the perspective of these companies being served these orders and projects is to pull from the app stores. But at least with Signal, they would be able to prove, well, but look at all these phone numbers coming from the UK or IP addresses coming from the UK. So I assume that the law would not be so stupid to say, well, we don't see any more UK users because we don't see the app. Obviously, they would still be able to see UK users. So wouldn't they also have to like shut down all of those phone numbers and IP addresses? And that also goes back to Session. Like if you saw those IP addresses, you would have to blacklist them. I think pulling out of the app stores would not be enough.
Well, like in that case, it's not us that, it's not the Session Foundation that would be seeing the IP addresses. It's actually the individual node operators in the network, because it's the 2200 node operators that actually store and route users' messages. So in that case, I suppose it would be the community of node operators which would be interacting or not interacting with UK IP addresses, and it would be up to them to decide whether they wanted to I guess block UK IP addresses or not. And that's ultimately probably going to depend on the jurisdiction that they're in as well.
So those node operators have the capability to block IP addresses?
Like it's not implemented in the software, but if you're running a node in the network, you can because we use onion routing in Session, but there's always a first hop that you need to talk to. And the first hop you would be talking to would see your IP address. It's the same in Tor as well. Like there always needs to be a first node that you're talking to before it onion routes after that. So at that point, when you're talking to a guard node, particularly like that node would be able to, write some sort of software or, block a certain range of IP addresses potentially from accessing it. I don't know if that's something that they would do. Like, this gets into kind of more esoteric like law, like Bitcoin nodes, for example. If someone sends a OFAC sanctioned Bitcoin transaction to an address which is on the US OFAC sanctions list, is it illegal for the miner to mine the block that transaction is in if they're in a certain country, or if they're in the US? Is it illegal for you as a node to relay that transaction to other nodes? It's not really clear at this point, I suppose.
Yeah, the OFAC sanctions are very powerful because actually miners that have the power to decide which blocks they want to mine or not, they can by the very least throttle certain transactions coming from certain lists or some sort of tainted quote unquote coins or something like that. But that's finances, and that's a lot strict. The regulation there is a lot stricter than anywhere else. But I may sound pessimistic, and maybe I am pessimistic, but I fear that we are going to see a broader push to splinter the internet, more countries coming out with laws and regulations against these sorts of defensive technologies, as I call them. Like Session is a defensive technology against surveillance and overreach or other things. And what we are trying to do, or like you are trying to do with technology, they could do away with these laws and doing away with these partnerships that make the internet work globally. And what they could do is that maybe they could actually make it so that, well, we are no longer going to be serving, let's say, Russian citizens. So we don't want you to have any Russian customers at all. So is there a way, and with an app like Signal, this would be trivial because Signal has the phone numbers and it has the IP addresses. You can hide the IP address. You can technically hide the phone number too, but you would have to go the extra step, and people would have to know. Most people don't know. So if there is an order that you are no longer allowed to serve Russian citizens, then Signal is done in Russia. So with all this talk about decentralization with Session, so how can Session defend against this, or can it defend against this? Does it have some sort of a model against a global godlike adversary, such as U.S. intelligence or GCHQ, perhaps some global telecoms?
The threat model for Session explicitly doesn't control for we call them global passive adversaries. Like, these are adversaries that are monitoring basically the entire internet. Onion routing breaks in a global passive adversary model, and so too does a lot of the censorship resistant properties that Session has. But I would say that basically every messaging application fails in this global passive adversary scenario. It's just a very difficult scenario to protect against, and the technology is just not quite there as well, both on the privacy side and then also on the denial of service side that a global passive adversary can kind of use against you.
I mean, you can be a lot harsher than this. You're very polite about that. I mean, I'm just trying to get people to realize that the level of power concentrated within these adversaries, which is your friendly neighborhood intelligence agency, that's out of this world. We don't have we don't compare. And yes, there are technologies that decentralized, and there are technologies that give people more power and autonomy and etc. But I always want to caution people that you should not take it for granted, because that could be taken away from you.
Certainly. There's only so much that you can do as someone that's working on developing a decentralized network to protect your average user, who's probably not going to be attacked by a state level actor, or at least, I mean, there's different levels here as well. The Iranian intelligence agency is not on the same level as, say, the US or China. So you can kind of protect against these lower grade nation state actors more easily than you can protect against these higher grade nation state actors. But most users aren't facing the US, the full force of the US government. Most users are kind of on the lower end, and it's easier to provide them with more privacy and security, especially when you're comparing against centralized messaging applications like Telegram. There's a lot you can do before you get to that point of, okay, how do we actually prevent nation state actors from being able to disrupt the system or reduce users' privacy?
All right. So what is the best feature that Session has?
Most people say that the ability to sign up without a phone number is massive, or an email address, or there's no real world identifier required to sign up to Session. Then people usually care equally about the fact that Session uses onion routing by default. So when you download the application, you send a message, you're already using onion routing. You don't actually need to configure anything there. And then there's the decentralized element of the network, which helps against censorship. There's no central server with moderators that can decide this is the content we're going to allow, and this is the content we're not going to allow. So those are typically the three things that people care about most. But I'd say at the top of the list, being able to sign up without a phone number is huge.
That's huge to me also. I really hate the fact that Signal, for instance, even though I'm using it and I'm recommending it to people, that it's pushing this phone number idea. And the biggest reason is that a lot of people cannot afford to have a phone number, and with Signal, that you have plenty of cases, domestic abuse, stalking, where if you create a Signal account, the stalker, abuser, whoever you're trying to escape is going to be notified that you have created a Signal account to talk to your lawyer, for instance, right? So that's going to be like, and I saw this was Moxie. He was a former whatever, I don't know, founder, CEO of Signal Foundation. I don't remember his title, but something like that. He went to Joe Rogan podcast, and Joe Rogan was complaining to him that, oh, you ratted me out to all of my friends who have my phone number. And Moxie was like, and why wouldn't you want that? And I was like, well, I want to create a secure space for me to talk in sensitive situations. At least I should have the option before that happens to keep that secret, to keep that deniable or undetectable at least, or obscure that if nothing else. And Signal, unfortunately, hasn't provided that feature for the longest time. Now you have the ability to actually sign up. You still have to sign up with the phone number, but you have the option of what do they call it? Nicknames or pseudonyms?
Like a username system basically. So people don't need to add you with your phone number. If you create a username, you can share your username with them.
But yeah, I still prefer a system where I don't have to go through that. Although it is easier to transition people, to convert people to use Signal because it's like WhatsApp. It's nothing new. So what is it with Session then? How does Session deal with that problem of getting new users sign up for something that doesn't even let them have a phone number, or doesn't even like give them a nice username list?
Well, and I think that comes to like one of the key reasons that Signal has like designed things in this way is that it allows the app to grow much easier because you're essentially like bootstrapping off existing social networks that people have. Like, they'll have a whole contact list with all of the phone numbers that they usually talk to. Then when they sign up for a Signal account, everyone who's already on Signal gets notified, okay, this user is on Signal, and they can start messaging them. And that is like huge for bringing new users into the application. And I think that's why Signal has kept it for so long. For us, like, I think what we do is we have an account ID. So when you sign up for Session, you generate this long, random public key, and then you send that to other users if they want to contact you. But I think like there's still more work to be done on that side to like make the barrier easier to cross. Stuff, for example, like deep links, like, or offering the option for people to be able to send their Session ID via their existing social networks to their existing contacts, but not forcing it. Like, not just doing it and then telling the user that it's been done, but giving them the option to do that. And then also like a deep link as well would provide the ability for someone to click on that link. It downloads the Session app on their phone or on their desktop, and then it adds that user in automatically as well. Or if they already have Session installed, it just kind of opens the app and starts a conversation with that user. So that's not a level that we're at yet, but I think that's like the ultimate vision, is to like give the user the choice about whether they want to share their account ID with other people. And then also like make it very easy for a new user to click on something, and then the Session app gets installed and they start a conversation. So it kind of drops some of the barriers to entry.
And you think that people should be using Session over Signal?
Well, I think it depends on your threat model, and also like your capacity for like user experience. Like, do you want something that is like the highest level of user experience, that's going to feel exactly like WhatsApp, but then trades off like metadata privacy and SIM swapping attacks and a bunch of other issues that Signal has? Or do you want something that's like high level privacy, like the highest you can get, but trades off some of that user experience? And I think if you're looking for something that's more private, I think Session is the right choice. But if you're looking for something that's like, the ultimate user experience feels very much like WhatsApp, and you're using it to like message your grandmother or something like that, Signal is probably still going to be positioned as the easiest to use. We're still kind of working towards bridging that gap.
All right. So there is a lot of crypto in Session, and crypto is a weird word because it's supposed to mean cryptography, but now it means cryptocurrency. And there's a lot of new jargon over there, lots of words that mean new things. So what is going on there? What's happening with Session with regards to cryptocurrency?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's both crypto and crypto in Session, cryptography and
Yeah.
cryptocurrency. I mean, when you download Session, like it's not pushed on you at all. Like it just feels like a normal messaging application. You don't need to like pay tokens to send messages or like stake or do anything like that to just use Session. So I just put that out there. Most users don't even know that Session is like a crypto-backed application. The crypto side of Session is really working at the incentive layer. So it was talking about that network of 2,200 nodes that is operating. That network to be able to start routing and storing users' encrypted messages, you actually have to stake a cryptocurrency. It's called Oxen right now, but it's going to be Session token soon. You stake that cryptocurrency and then you earn rewards for operating in the network. So it incentivizes those 2,200 nodes to actually store and route users' messages. It also like prevents, or it makes Sybil attacks much harder as well. So Sybil attacks are basically one user pretending to be thousands of users or node operators. So you can consider the case like in Tor where anyone can run a node in Tor. And there's a lot of concern about, okay, maybe like, some national security agencies are running nodes in Tor to be able to gather users' data. That becomes a lot harder because you need to put a financial stake up to run those nodes in the network. So it becomes more financially costly. It doesn't prevent the issue altogether. It just makes it more financially costly. But that is like a good property in itself. And also like when you're staking cryptocurrency, like if you're seen to perform, negative actions on the network, like, being offline or, maliciously denying service, you can actually have that stake removed from you. And then there's a financial cost to that misbehavior. So it kind of aligns the economics and the, decentralization of the network together. But it's not really pushed on Session users. It's more something that is related to, the running of the infrastructure of Session.
So how much money would it take to compromise Session network?
It's hard to calculate because what happens is, as you start buying tokens off the market to be able to stake those tokens into the network, you're essentially like, buying and moving the price up. So, if you were to try and buy 1,000 nodes worth of stake, you would essentially push the price up as you purchase more and more and more Session tokens. So it's difficult to calculate. It depends like, okay, is this actor like, buying tokens like very, very slowly over time? That's less likely to push the price up, for example. Or are they buying them all at once? Like, or are they buying them off market from someone else? Or are they like renting nodes from other people? Like it's a complex economic question.
Okay. I was hoping to get an estimate, but
So yes, I don't know. Like you could, if you just looked at the stake required, I don't know, like millions, millions just based on the stake. If you didn't move the market at all, like, but if you assume that you're going to move the market by doing this, like, tens of millions probably.
And what's in it for the benign node operators?
So they get rewards for essentially routing and storing users' messages in the token. So that they stake some tokens, they get some rewards every block for providing service to the network.
So in a similar way, Bitcoin works, or where are those rewards coming from?
Yeah, so it's like similar right now. There's essentially like a new emission which is created. Like so each new block that gets created, if you are a node on the network, you get that cryptocurrency from that block that was created. Changing to a slightly different economic model shortly that will have a fixed supply. And then the rewards will be paid from this pool, which is constantly decreasing over time. But the input to the system is via Session monetization, which is not yet live. But the idea is you essentially have something very similar to Telegram Premium, where it's a subscription service. You pay $4.99 a month, and you get some like premium features. So that may be like higher file uploads, larger groups, more profile customizability, and then that subscription fee essentially like goes into buying session tokens, and those session tokens are then burned and then reminted back into the rewards pool. And then the rewards pool is like constantly topped up over time to keep the node network running.
So node operators will have to spend money, USDs or whatever, to get the tokens to run the node, and then they get the tokens back for running the node. And if they want to cash out, they just have to get it from an exchange, or?
Yeah, so like right now, there's a couple of exchanges, but we'll support like DEXs as well. So Uniswap and these like smart contract based systems, so that if you have session tokens or you want to buy session tokens, you can go to Uniswap and in a decentralized way get access to cryptocurrency. And then also if you're staking a node and you want to sell the tokens that are underlying your node, you unstake that node, and then you'll be able to take those tokens to a DEX or a SEX and then be able to sell those tokens and recuperate the value, or whatever the floating value of session token is at the time.
All right. So something like Tor, which also operates over nodes across the world, I think the number is somewhere around 8,000 to 10,000, but that might have been out of date. So why do you think it is important to have this new novel cryptocurrency incentivization scheme when something like Tor has been running for decades now, voluntarily, and people are not getting any rewards for running it? In fact, people are getting punished for running it, especially if they run exit nodes, because they're going to get swatted all the time for all the traffic that people are going to over Tor.
Yeah, as I said before, I think it's mostly about the Sybil attack prevention on that side. So like you're putting this upfront cost to be involved in the network, and then you also have like you're financially bound as well to participating as a good actor, because if you don't participate as a good actor, there's the ability to lock up funds, slash funds as well. So there's like more of a cost to being a bad actor in the network. So if someone was to run 1,000 Tor nodes and they're seen to be a bad actor, essentially like Tor is like somewhat centralized. They essentially have this like directory authority which decides the list of Tor nodes which are going to be served to Tor clients, and the Tor directory authorities essentially will go in and like ban a bunch of like nodes from the network, or remove them from the network. But that operator can just like turn around, refresh like their IP addresses, go to different infrastructure, and continue to run those 1,000 nodes. So there's no real financial cost for them for being a bad actor in the network. And also like there's not a barrier to entry to running nodes in the network as well. I don't think that there's anything wrong with Tor. I think it's a good system, but we're just building something different.
All right, so it's more of a attack prevention scheme than an incentivization scheme then?
One other like aspect I'll say to this is like it's way easier to enforce performance standards on nodes as well. So there's essentially like a decentralized testing system that exists in session with the nodes. So they like periodically test each other, and then they'll vote on each other as nodes. And if like a node is offline or not storing messages or not available, they can essentially like vote that node off the network. The software is doing these tests at all times. That is much harder to do when you don't have an incentive model and a punishment on the side of that incentive model as well. That means that like the session network, the 2,200 nodes that are running on the session network are actually generally a lot more performant than say your average Tor node. And I'd say like most Tor nodes are on the very low end spec side of things. And Tor does this thing called bandwidth weighted routing, where they basically, if you're a higher grade node in the network, you get used in people's paths more often. So it ends up being that, like, it's probably 2 or 3,000 of the Tor nodes end up getting used in the majority of paths, and then you have like a longer tail of more poorly performing nodes, less bandwidth nodes that are being used in a fraction of users' paths. So even though the network looks a lot bigger, because it's not enforcing performance standards to the same degree that Session is, like the end result actually ends up being quite similar. So yeah, on the performance side as well, like, yeah, you can do a lot more when you have that incentive and then punishment system.
I mean, yeah, it could be also the case that some people who would run a node would be put off by the fact that they have to stake first or get a token they never heard of before. Do you think that's a concern too?
Yeah, for sure. Like, there's always going to be people who don't want to jump that hurdle, and that's going to prevent some people from running nodes. But the crypto industry, I suppose, has built this network of people who are willing to run nodes if there's the incentive there. And I think that's where we're getting most of our node network. I think it would have been quite a bit harder to bootstrap a volunteer node network. You don't, apart from Tor, you don't see too many volunteer node networks that are set up these days. So it's a bit harder to be the second mover on that side of things as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is Fediverse and things that are kind of growing there, but yeah, it's usually you usually see this networking effect where people are centralizing anyway, even in these decentralized and federated systems, and they're centralizing towards the most popular or default servers that are often chosen. Because like, choose your server, and then people are overwhelmed with the thousands of servers they can choose from. So it's a lot easier to say, well, this is the official server by the project, but you can obviously choose any one you want, and most people are just going to choose the whatever official one is, and that kind of like defeats the decentralization and federation ethos of the whole thing. So how does Session maintain that is sufficiently decentralized? There's some mechanisms in Tor in onion routing where it is trying to prevent let's say the same telecom or IP ISP provider from operating too many nodes or getting an entry and an exit. So how is Session designed to make sure that the nodes that people are running are actually coming from different people?
Yeah, so there's no KYC process like to run a node in the network, because that would be like quite antithetical to what we're doing. So you can't really say that an operator is a unique individual, because you're not like KYCing them with their national identity or something like that. But you can look at the IP ranges as well. Like, if they're setting up a lot of nodes in the same data center, then they're typically going to be sharing like some sort of block of IP addresses. And Session does prevent you from having multiple nodes in your path that are, in, I think, it's like a -16 like block of IP addresses from that point of view. I think there is more that can be done on that side of things though as well. I don't like our onion request model, our onion routing model isn't as kind of sophisticated as Tor yet. That's something like we've been working on in the background, like to bring this more advanced onion routing model into Session, which is called LokiNet, but it's another project that we're working on. We have this like fairly simple onion routing protocol that's in the application right now, which provides like the security properties of onion routing in terms of that you're encrypting for multiple nodes, but doesn't yet have like all the sophisticated features that are used by Tor. Like another one of the things that Session does as well is like tries to preserve your guard node as well, so that you're not constantly rotating through different guard nodes, which is something that Tor does as well. But I think like there's more work to be done on that front.
And don't you think that with introducing cryptocurrency and the finances into a secure messaging app, that you're opening up yourself to more regulation, more oversight, more I guess vilification? This is something that was also criticized when Signal introduced mobile coin to their app, only because they wanted to have payments in the app. And that's because like every other messaging app has a payment system, and it's obviously not private. So Signal wanted to come up with something that is private, but they came up with a token, let's say, that it didn't really work out for them. And I assume, I mean, it's there, people can use it, but I don't know if that many people use it. But one of the biggest critiques was that, well, you have a beautiful encrypted messaging app, and now you are going to be inviting all the financial agencies and investigatory agencies from the tax and banking and transaction systems and all these other things into your app. So you're vastly exposing your attack surface from all of these agencies that could just shut down your operation because of some dubious regulatory overreach or misunderstanding, or perhaps some changes in the financial regulatory sector. So don't you think that this is something that Session is also being exposed to?
Potentially. I mean, I think a lot of the pushback on the mobile coin integration into Signal was that it felt very tacked on, like that they had built this application that didn't really have major reason or like major cryptocurrency integration from the start, and that they were kind of bringing that into the application, and it felt very jarring for users. I think with Session, it's quite a bit different because like crypto is at the core of what's like, the network that actually stores and routes messages. So we're not coming at this from the perspective of like, oh, we're just tacking on a cryptocurrency here. It's being used in every like interaction that you make with a service node. Like that service node is receiving rewards for operating the network. So I think for us, it feels like less disingenuous to like further connect the Session token with the Session application. And I think it does also enable like a bunch of cool like new features as well. Like we've seen a lot of messaging applications move more down the like mini app, like wallet integration thesis. And you can see this in, I'm not like promoting WeChat here, but like people use WeChat like every single day to make payments, to like purchase things. In China, it's like your wallet, your messaging application, like somewhat your internet browser. Like it kind of combines all of these different features, and that is somewhat because of the ability to make financial payments in the application. Whether it exposes us to regulators more or less, like we already have that exposure because of the network, the network of 2,200 nodes that's running and being incentivized. And, being in the private messaging space already exposes us to a bunch of different regulations too. So I actually think it's, not the primary concern. The primary concern would be stuff you were talking about earlier, like, there's this increasing crackdown by different nation states, like to limit end-to-end encryption and to limit privacy online. So that's probably the thing that's like at the top of the foundation's mind, and like at the top of like, Session developers that work on Session as well.
So how is Session making money now? Is it profitable? Is it what is it?
So like Session is a non-for-profit, or it's like a foundation established in Switzerland. So its purpose is not to create profit or make money. Obviously, it needs to be sustainable so that it can fund contributors that work on the Session application. And most of that funding thus far has been through like selling tokens and then being able to use that US dollars or Australian dollars or whatever dollars to be able to fund development of the application. So that has been the model up until now. Once we introduce monetization into the application, the model becomes a bit more sustainable in terms of you're not just emitting tokens to nodes with no like income to the network, or like no value coming into the system. That's the ultimate goal, is like the monetization comes in, buys Session tokens, burns them, and then goes back to the service node network. The foundation receives like 10% of that income as well. So it will be the token income, I suppose. So we'll be able to take that token income and be able to sell that to be able to fund future development of Session.
Right. So, and the monetization is only going to be the premium subscriptions, or is there something else?
There's a few other things that are being worked on as well. So Session has a name system as well. So when you have that long account ID, you can actually map that to a human readable name. And that happens on the blockchain as well. So it doesn't use any of the centralized like DNS like systems. So that mapping system, when you buy a name, you also burn session tokens from doing that. And then you're able to kind of like map that to your account ID, but also like trade it as well. Like if you have a rare name, like the letter A or something, like some other user may want to buy that. And then like the protocol receives income if there's a transfer, or the idea is that the protocol would receive income if there was a transfer or a new name registration too. So yeah, that's broadly, but that's another thing that is being worked on. And then there's also monetization of LokiNet, which is this like more advanced onion router. There's some ideas about how to monetize that as well. So there's a few different routes. I think Session Pro is probably going to be the main thing that pushes value back into the protocol. But yeah, there's a few things on the side as well.
Yeah, there are some apps that are monetizing through paid subscriptions. I think the biggest of them is Threema, which is only offering a paid account. You cannot actually create a free account. The interesting thing is that you can just send them cash in an envelope and they will just get you an account. But the weird thing is that I think it costs like $5, euros, Swiss francs. But you have to send them 10, I think, and they will give you like 2 accounts, which, yeah, I understand that's like to broaden the adoption. You're probably buying it for someone else too, but it's a bit strange that, yes, on the one hand, like everything needs to be paid for. On the other hand, people have distorted expectations because everything on the internet has been quote unquote for free. But I like to call it that you're not paying with money, you're paying with your data. So it's not free, you're paying one way or another. So you're always going to be paying for this. And people don't really seem to grasp that concept very well. And that's frustrating because I don't think any of these apps should really be free. I think even Signal should be charging at least like $1 a year. I think that's how WhatsApp started, right? It was something like you would have to get it for $1 or $2 a year, and now all of these messaging apps are free, but they're expensive. Like all of this, like group chats and all these features and voice calls, video calls, that bandwidth and all of that, that's expensive. Servers are expensive. So I'm a bit worried, and I don't. Some people say that Signal is the most sustainable app. I don't know. Is it? Because
I don't know about that. Like, because they released some information, I think 6 or 12 months ago, about how much it actually costs to run Signal, and the costs like ran up to 50 million a year, I think is what they were saying. So they essentially need to receive like $50 million a year in donations to make Signal sustainable. Yeah, I mean, like on the monetization front, I think you're like very right. Like people have this expectation that everything is free, and they don't want to pay for a messaging application upfront. That really like kills user adoption, I think. And I think Threema is a really cool application, but if they weren't free, they would have scaled like to a much more like larger extent. With Session, I think the idea that we're kind of most interested in is like the idea of a freemium model. So you still have users that are able to use the application for free, but then those power users that are using the application way more or want those additional features are able to pay a subscription fee to get access to those features, but you're still not preventing people from accessing the application for free. And then you essentially have the users, the power users that might be like 3 to 5% of the user base subsidizing the use of all of the free users. I think that is like kind of the best of both worlds. And that's kind of where we see, I suppose, like the way to be able to monetize Session most efficiently.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking for a sustainable model, and it's important to be a not-for-profit or non-profit because the for-profit incentive can be corruptive to the privacy interest, and that's we've seen that happening many times in the past. That we've seen projects come and go, mostly due to the fact that something exciting came up and it was either acquired and then shut down by an incumbent company, or they ran out of money, or they just sold. And it happens all the time, even today. So people in this community, they have to be careful. On the other hand, I have to criticize people in this community that they feel incredibly entitled. And I've had talks in the past with other people, other developers, and pretty much all of them have had the experience where they would have people in the community having like insane requests for features, for things, for abilities and stuff, and they would always want all of that to be for free. And anytime, like, because much of that stuff is open source, or the broader movement is free software or free and open source software, but free software it has nothing to do with price, although the price is usually not there, but it can be priced. The free part is really just that the ability of the end user to have the ownership rights over whatever they're using, whatever code they're using. It's really just an intellectual property debate before anything else. It's not much. It's not like, I don't know what people imagine free software to be, but free software movement is really just like, we don't believe that books should be proprietary. We believe that all books should be in public domain. That's where it stems from. So the entitlement in the privacy community to get everything for free and to have one-to-one match with the big tech features and all of those features that they offer is that needs to be dealt with. And I mean, you don't have to comment on this at all. I'm just trying to point this out because it is very easy to criticize projects, and it is very easy to feel like these users who are entitled, like that you deserve something. But
yeah,
people need to eat. Go ahead.
I definitely see that on a daily basis. Like, we have, like, everything in Session is open source, and we have a GitHub, and people raise issues there. And I would say, like, 90% of the time, like, people are very, like, good faith, and like they're raising issues because they want to see this feature in the application, and they're not like pushing for it very aggressively. But there are those like kind of 10% of users who, like, are asking for a very complex feature to be put into the application right away, and I guess don't really understand like the cost of delivering a feature like that, in development hours. And then like there's other priorities as well. Like, you're constantly juggling these things. So I think, like, a majority of people, I think, are realistic about this. But there is that core of users that, thinks that, these decentralized apps should be at the exact same level as decentralized applications and should provide everything for free. And I think that is a problem.
And so what is the priority for Session now?
Look, over the last like maybe year and a half, I think the priority has been looking at the existing features that are in Session and improving those features as much as possible. So, we had this system of like one-on-one chats, or we had this system of groups, which was like fairly unreliable. Like, maybe sometimes you would miss messages, like you wouldn't get a notification, or the message wouldn't be downloaded correctly. Those are like core functions to a messaging application. And I think it's like, over the last year and a half, we have spent so much time trying to re-architect those features to be as, as reliable, as speedy as centralized messaging applications, so that the core of the application feels just as good as Signal or WhatsApp. There are other things as well in terms of like, you're adding new features to the application, but I actually think the focus, which has been a good thing in the last kind of year and a half, has been to just focus on the core of the application and build that out to be as reliable as possible. I think we're starting to get over some of those hurdles now. The new group system is literally going to enable tomorrow. So it'll be very good to see that get out. And then like we're looking at improving the calls experience, which has been in the application for a long time, but has been kind of buggy and not reliable. We'll get to that. And then I think like once the core is like looking really good and super stable, it's about like, okay, now like we kind of need to reach feature parity with some of the other messaging applications like Signal. So all of the features that Signal has, we should also have as well, so that when someone comes from Signal to Session, they're not actually losing anything by doing that. And it feels like a very smooth and good experience when they come over.
All right. And regarding the nonprofit and funding and monetization, you are just a nonprofit. You're not doing any of the OpenAI weird shit with the with the corporate structure and all that stuff.
No. Like we're in a bit of a transitionary phase because we have an Australian registered non-for-profit, and like we're kind of transferring things over to the Swiss non-for-profit, but there's no for-profit company which is like extracting all of the value here. So, and that's not something that we want to do as well. We've been building this for 7.5 years, and our goal is not to get as rich as possible. So yeah.
So what if Satya Nadella comes to you from Microsoft and says, "Listen, man, I'm gonna give you $1 billion. You gotta open up that for-profit arm"?
Look, the Swiss constitution, essentially like when you establish a foundation in Switzerland, you have to write this like constitution. And I think the Swiss constitution very much prevents activities like that. So if something like that were to happen, you would end up in massive legal lawsuits, I would imagine, in Switzerland. But yeah, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't exactly say how that would work.
All right. Well, you could change the constitution, huh? Who writes it?
You can change. There is a way to change the constitution in Switzerland, but it's very limited. Like, and you need to go to like the courts basically if you want to amend your constitution. I think they're open to the idea of you putting more restrictive clauses in the constitution, but very against the idea of like, you wrote something in this constitution, now you're removing it. I think that's like basically impossible to do under Swiss law. But again, not a lawyer, so I'll just close that.
Not a legal advice.
Yes, I'm not also not on the foundation as well. Like I'm not a board member of the foundation. So anything that anything that I've said about the foundation thus far is from what I know about how the foundation has been set up. But I don't 100% know how it would respond in all of these cases. Like, oh, what if you get a request from like the UK government, or like what if you want to change your constitution? Like that stuff is I know a little bit about, but it's like somewhat opaque to me.
So who is behind the foundation then?
So Alex Linton is the president of the Swiss Foundation. He lives in Switzerland, and he runs the operation there. And then there's like contributors to the Session project, which is essentially me and like some of the other teams that work on Session as well, like contribute to the open source code base, but the foundation is the one that publishes the application, owns all of the GitHub repositories, manages essentially like the distribution of the application.
And you're all employees of the foundation?
Yeah, in one way or another, and or that's essentially the model that is going to happen long term. There's like a Australian foundation as well, which has been set up, and that's kind of still operating the legacy part of Session to an extent. But the idea is that the Session Foundation eventually has all the funding, and then is able to write grants to different Session contributors to be able to work on Session long term.
Huh. That's an interesting structure. I've been doing some research into foundations, but mostly these. I know that the foundation is a very tricky word to use here, because it's a very broad term, much broader than what people would think. When you say foundation, people say, "Oh, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Clinton Foundation," but precisely these foundations are the worst kinds of charities, because at least by the U.S. tax law. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so but from my research, I was able to find that, and this is on the IRS website also, that up to like 95% of the foundation's finances and all the funds that they have can be reinvested into private businesses. It can be like a for-profit venture. Like you can park that in a hedge fund or wherever you want and generate money this way. And this is how the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for instance, works. Like most of these foundations work, they only need to donate 5% of their assets to charitable causes, but the charitable causes can also include for-profit companies. So a charitable donation can be made to MasterCard, for instance, in Africa to spread a feature, to expand a feature in an African country, let's say. And that's something that like happens all the time. So people think that, oh, well, this person gave to this foundation 50 billion. Well, that isn't the same as saying this person gave to a charity 50 billion or a charitable cause 50 billion. They just park the money in the foundation and it's going to grow in assets there. But that's for, I think these are called perpetual foundations. So, I don't know the specifics of other foundations that are actually doing charitable things. And again, you said also that you're not a lawyer, but I would be very much interested to know why a structure like this would exist. Why do you have a foundation in Switzerland? I guess I understand that the appeal of Swiss jurisdiction. Plenty of companies are there now because of that, because of the independence and autonomy, and everything has to go through Swiss courts. Some of the most secretive banks are in Switzerland for the same reason. But then you have also this Australian foundation. And I would really want to understand why all of this setup is there. Why is this structure so that you're managing? You said some sort of legacy portion of Session. So if you can explain it, you can go ahead and explain it. But if you don't, just point me to the right direction, and I'll look it up. But it can be a bit confusing. It's a lot easier to understand. Well, this is a private company; they're there to make money.
Yeah. So, like, just to give a little bit of the background, there's some blogs published about this online as well. Like, if you go to the Session Foundation website, so you'll be able to get a bit more information there, and probably more accurate than what I'm saying. But Session was essentially originally set up in Australia. So in 2018, the company was founded as a non-for-profit in Australia, which is bound by a constitution. And over time, obviously Australian laws have started to become more aggressive towards going after end-to-end encryption and passing these kind of laws that kind of introduce this idea of should we be able to force developers to insert a backdoor? It's a bit more legally gray than that, because they have this systemic weakness clause which prevents you from putting in what they would call a backdoor, but then it comes down to the courts to decide what that is eventually, or the Attorney General in Australia. So the idea is we're not super the foundation wasn't super happy with how things were moving in Australia. So we've taken the Australian organization and started to move away from that organization. We've set up this Swiss non-for-profit, which Switzerland has, as you were saying before, very clear rules and regulations, and then also constitutional protections in the Swiss constitution around protecting privacy and limiting the ability for the state to be able to mandate backdoors and stuff like that. So things are moving towards the Swiss Foundation. The Swiss Foundation has now all of the controls over the publishing of the application, which used to sit with the Australian organization. So it's kind of been something that we set up in one way, at the start in 2018, and then things have progressively changed with the law in Australia, and I think that's made it more clear that Australia is not the right place to have the steward of the Session project. The Session project should be stewarded out of a country that actually respects privacy and isn't forcing people to put backdoors into applications and so on and so forth. So there's been that kind of transfer over, and that process is still ongoing. The Swiss Foundation was only set up, I think, 8 months ago or 6 months ago. So there's still kind of this legacy operation that's still going on, and things are transferring over there. So you can't. typically can't just like move every single like employee at the same time, and like you've been operating under this model for 5 or 6 years and now you have this new model. It takes a bit of time to move everything over and get everything structured in the right way.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up those Swiss laws. I also cover that on my channel, and I found them to be very draconian. Basically, before the UK law came into force, which was after Brexit, because the EU courts struck it down on grounds of human rights, Australia was actually the worst jurisdiction in this aspect. It really, the law, I think it passed in 2018-ish, 19 maybe, I don't know. Yeah, and it also had all these technical capability notices and all this weird stuff about forcing developers in a project to basically hijack their own company and compromise their own users, install backdoors, give lawful access to all of these intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies for all kinds of reasons, not far from just national security and stuff. And I really despised what was happening there. It was like the justifications coming out from Australian officials were completely outrageous and like super authoritarian. I've never seen anything like this in a democracy. And then the UK law came out, and now it's just the UK is the worst country in the world. But in Australia,
as a bit of a testing ground for
yeah,
like some of these laws. I guess Australia, Canada, and the US, the UK are kind of like these countries where things are almost trialed out a little bit, and then like they make it to larger Western democracies, if there wasn't, as much pushback. But yeah, it's not nice to be in one of those jurisdictions where, you have these like laws hanging over your head. And I think like it would be much worse if we were a centralized company, because if you're open source, like there's a very limited ability to like insert backdoors into the application, because people can just read the code. And
I mean, you don't have to publish the code, right?
Well, it depends. I mean, like we sign every release that goes out, and then people can compare the code that's running on their device to the code that is on GitHub, for example, and see that there is
those
like
that do it, yeah,
backdoor there. But yeah, it depends if users are going to do that or not. But like ultimately, most users download like Session or Signal or WhatsApp, whatever messaging application that they're using, they'll download it from like Google Play or the Apple Store. And those companies operate under the jurisdiction of the countries that they're operating in. So if the Google Play Store, is operating in Australia, and the Australian government comes to them and says like, oh, replace like the binary that you're giving to the user with this like compromised binary, and that user doesn't check that it has the right signatures or it matches the code that is on GitHub, there's ultimately like nothing you can really do as a software developer, right? Like the user is like screwed in this situation, which is like a very pessimistic thing to say, but you're operating like in the real world, and these are things that can happen. So it doesn't even really need the involvement of the developer of the application if they go to the App Store directly and just push a compromised binary to that user.
Well, that's very sad.
Yep.
Huh. Yeah. That's an interesting attack vector. And again, we would not know if such an order was served.
No, well, I mean, presumably like Google Play or the App Store. I mean, that depending on which country you're in, like there's certain like gag orders as well. Like they're not allowed to talk about this stuff. So, I mean, in the US as well, like although there isn't these like specific laws on the books, there is like a lot of like private collaboration. I think like with the NSA, like it came out like in Prism that they essentially had these black box rooms that like all of the internet traffic would be would like go through this black box room that the NSA controlled, and then it would come into like AT&T's center, and AT&T just like let that happen. Like I don't think that there was necessarily a law that bound them to do that, but like there's a lot of cooperation, I suppose, between like private companies and organizations like the government, even if there isn't a law on the books. So yeah, it's not to paint like too much of a pessimistic scenario. Like I think that private messaging applications are still useful, because not everyone is kind of facing a nation state actor. Like some people you're just talking about, like, okay, they're facing like corporate level surveillance, or they want to get away from their like abusive partner or something, and their abusive partner is not going to have access to like be able to push a random like APK via Google Play to that user. So it ultimately like comes back to like the idea of threat models, and like where do you think you are in this like threat model scenario, and understanding what your threat model is, and changing your behavior based on that.
Yeah, and also needs to be mentioned that the same attack vector that you described with the binary attack through Google is applicable to Apple, because like they're the same, like one-to-one. Yeah. So Apple has the same access. I saw someone, I don't know who it was, they called the Play Store and or Play Services and Apple equivalents of that on the iPhone as rootkits. And to people who don't know, like rootkit is kind of like this clandestine access to people's devices that you can't do anything about. And like you cannot even remove that thing from your phone. Like it has to be there. On Android, you have a lot more freedom to install a custom operating system, for instance, Graphene OS, which is what I use. And that's precisely because of that. I don't want to have the Play Store have this privileged access on my phone where, again, and this is precisely what I thought, but I thought I was crazy. Like, okay, so I don't like this idea that Google Play Store is a rootkit. I must do something about it. But I never told anyone that that this could be a possibility, but it 100% is a possibility. I mean, like, yeah, Google could do this on their own volition.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I haven't heard anything about them doing this, but they could be doing it without users' knowledge. I mean, ultimately, like usually like governments and agencies like this are looking for the most efficient way to compromise like a particular user. Like usually they have targeted users that they're looking for data on. So maybe like it's just not worth the fight to like go to Google and say like distribute this APK. They have other ways like to compromise devices. Like you look at like these kind of tools like Pegasus, or like Cellebrite like develops these tools which can just compromise the entire device like with a 0-day. And then if they're already paying for that tool, they may as well just like use it to compromise the whole device instead of just say a specific application on the device. So there's several methods by which they can do this, but yeah, it's not really possible these days to like be 100% secure online. At some point you need to like consider, okay, maybe I should be having this conversation in real life, because at least like the scope of what can be the scope of how I can be attacked, like is more easily understood, I think, in those scenarios.
Well, maybe not even that, because now with the level of surveillance that's happening in the streets, that's also something that like people would have no idea, and you could go to a private place and talk with someone and have the encryption of your communication through that aspect, but then there would be a record of you meeting up. There would be a record of you staying at someone else's house for a certain period of time. So you would pretty much have the one-to-one metadata comparison to the digital thing. You would just not have the content, presumably, but then everyone's devices are equipped with these voice assistants that are not supposed to be listening, but appears to be listening quite a lot. I mean, Siri had this scandal. I think they were sued for this, and if I remember correctly, they had to like pay off some people for Siri listening to people having sex and stuff, and having that transliterated by real Apple employees or something like that, or contractors. But I might be off on that a little bit, but it was a scandal with Siri that it was listening to people pretty much at all times, even in their like private settings. also, like, Apple has been caught like completely disregarding the toggles not to collect telemetry. So and they would be collecting telemetry and detailed analytics and diagnostics from the devices, even if people disable those settings. So like all of these things are happening. Like you see one thing on your UI on your device and you see, oh well, I don't like this, so I'm gonna disable that, or I'm gonna toggle that off or delete that thing. But you only see that. You don't know if that's happening truly. And that's kind of like the most frustrating thing about all of this. And despite all of that negativity, I still do believe, as you said, that we should be doing all of these things. We should try to move to more private messengers and alternatives for all of these incumbent tech companies. We should try to be more private. We should try to be more resilient, resistant even. And I don't know if I want to go further than this. It's a bit of an uncomfortable conversation, but like all of the things that we are doing, we know that it is a cat and mouse game. That there is a problem, and then we are putting up defenses, and then a new problem comes up, and then we are putting up next defenses, and it goes like this, on and on. We are introducing like VPNs and Tor and onion networks and end-to-end encryption, metadata resilience, and every time we do something, a new problem comes up, and our only reaction is defense. What Session is just defense. Signal is defense. And I don't want to like suggest anything here, okay? So people calm down, right? But you are not going to win a match just defending, right? You're eventually going to have to score a point. So there has to be at least some sort of a legal offense, or like some sort of like within the legal means, like fighting these legally, politically, perhaps lobbying, organizing, protesting, of course, goes in there. Like people need to be active. We need to be able to win this politically also. We need to agitate, we need to get people on our side, and then we need to use as many people as we can to build up pressure so that our duly elected representatives are held accountable, and they are like reverting back all of these stupid laws, perhaps even reforming the entire intelligence apparatus, which is just entirely focused on offense. Like there's very little defense. NSA is an entirely offensive organization. I mean, they've done some defensive stuff, but it's almost all of it is just offense. And cybersecurity in the US is almost all of it is just offense. And now they are realizing that, oh, well, we screwed up because all of the exploits that we've been using can be all indeed abused by foreign adversaries. So they've been hacked by China all over. Good. Now, CISA is saying, well, you should be using end-to-end encryption. So we were wrong to tell people that end-to-end encryption should be backdoored, because those backdoors will be used by China and Russia and all the other bad people that we don't like. But that's a step in the right direction, but a tiny step, and I think a bit too late for the U.S. intelligence to realize. So I'm just like ranting here on this aspect that like, yeah, we should do more than just relying on tech. And maybe you have something to say about that lobbying part or something like that, like gathering funds to get this message out there.
Yeah, I think like from my perspective, I think the thing that is most important is that people care about privacy, and when they see kind of the common straw mans that get used to remove people's privacy, whether it be like, oh, like there's terrorists and there's drug dealers and we need to like control against these people, so you can't have privacy because we need to be able to read their messages. I think people really need to strengthen their minds against some of this like essentially cognitive warfare that's happening against privacy. If the average person really believes in privacy and believes in their right to be able to communicate with other people without, a third party surveilling them at all times, then when governments do try and pass laws or strengthen agencies' power to surveil them, the political backlash from that will be so strong. I just think that where people haven't strengthened their minds enough against these very emotive arguments that are used to limit privacy. It's like no one wants there to, be another terrorist attack. Like, that's horrible. But we need to understand that by taking privacy away from all users, the end effect of that is much worse than, if you have like these one-off events that happen. So I don't know. I think people need to kind of strengthen themselves against some of those arguments and be more proactive when governments do try to strengthen their capacity to surveil everyone, including just normal people.
That's an interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
You finished?
Yeah.
I thought you were saying something. All right. So the strengthening your mind against these arguments that's a very interesting way to conceptualize this. So what do you think could be done better? Or, like I've asked you a lot of questions for solutions and stuff. So do you think there's something that non-developers could do, or creators and speakers could do?
That's a much harder question. I think there's a tendency to like disengage for a lot of people. I think a lot of, when we're talking right now about like all of the bad things that can happen, like, like they can compromise your device, they can push like, APKs to you without you knowing, they can like, take over like network components to be able to surveil you in that way without you even knowing. I think a lot of people just kind of give up at that point. And I think this is happening a lot with younger people as well. They almost like think that it's not a battle worth fighting anymore. They just give up their data and they're like, okay, well, I get to go on TikTok and, scroll and I see these funny videos and it's worth it. I think people need to, maybe it just needs to get worse, like before something changes. Like the surveillance just needs to become so ridiculous that people actually start realizing that, okay, we're essentially in a panopticon here and we need to like revert our course. But I think like it hasn't gotten to that point yet. Maybe it has for like some of the more in tune people in the world, but I don't think it's gotten that way for the average user yet. If it does start to get that way, I think there will be a reversion of where we are. But that's not a very sobering thing to say, or it's a very sobering thing to say that things have to get worse before they get better. But it might be the case.
I mean, you're the second person who told me that in a row. So I kind of believe that. I think that there are things that are beyond the tipping point in a lot of aspects and areas at the same time, which is unfortunate. Do you think that like do you think that something like Graphene OS and do you know Accrescent, the app store?
No, I know F-Droid. Is it a non-proprietary app store or?
Yeah, F-Droid is just for free and open source apps. There's also Accrescent, which is super new. There's not that many apps, very few apps, in fact. And it's supposed to be giving developers and users like more control over what's happening. So with Google Play Store, and I do believe that's the case also for Apple. Basically, Google is taking over the signing keys and all that stuff, right? So you can explain that better if you want to. With Accrescent, it's the developers who are in control of their keys, and could this be the important aspect that could remove this third-party medium? So I guess what I'm suggesting here is that with Graphene OS, with Accrescent, with perhaps some other applications, what you're doing is that you're removing that third party or that medium or anyone who is delivering that process to you from your transaction with, let's say, the developer or service provider. And do you think that this could be a sort of a solution to the attack vector there and part of the issues with centralization of that?
I definitely think that would be a move in the right direction. Yeah, as you were saying, like Google Play has, used to have this distribution model where developers would sign software and then would be able to push that via Google Play, and then the device, the other end, would verify that this was the developer's key. So Google Play wouldn't be able to push something if it wasn't signed by the developer. So I think that's definitely a move Google has taken away that ability. Now they manage all of the keys. So, they have much more ability to push things onto users without them consenting. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. We also sign our binaries completely outside of the Google Play system as well. So there's signatures online that you can verify that come from Foundation. The Swiss Foundation signs software releases as well. So that's one way that if you do want to verify things, you can actually download the APK and then verify the signature on the device that it matches the Foundation's keys, not Google's keys. That's one way to do it. But it's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't solve everything. Graphene OS may solve the OS issue. You may use alternate app stores to be able to get around the Google Play issue, or just download APKs yourself if you want to. But if the hardware is compromised, and this came out as well, in Prism, that they were in the NSA was essentially working with chip manufacturers, or laptops would be shipped out to people. They would intercept them and put special hardware in that they could access. It doesn't prevent that, and it also doesn't prevent network level surveillance as well. So as soon as you're sending information off your device, what is the metadata that is involved there? Is your carrier doing some sort of deep packet inspection, or at least monitoring the metadata of the different packets that are being sent to the service that you talk to? There are other ways around that, of course, onion routing and VPNs, control some of that. The hardware issue is a lot trickier to deal with. I know that there are some people that are working on kind of more open source hardware on that side of things as well. And that could be an interesting route, where we solve this kind of end to end. But yeah, it's going to take effort of multiple different people. So there's people working on privacy at every layer of the stack, fortunately. And I think it's not going to be solved by one application developer or OS developer or hardware developer or network, privacy developer. It's actually going to be a combination of all of those things, which helps us get to a better place.
Yeah, 100%. That's why it can feel a bit overwhelming, but anywhere people can start from where it's easiest to them, it all counts. And as you alluded to, the hardware issue, that's what I get from some people. But I do get that a lot, that, well, it doesn't matter what you do because you're going to get pawned anyway. Well, not necessarily. Yes, you can get backdoored through your hardware, but that's more targeted. It doesn't really happen on mass scale. And there are mechanisms that you can protect yourself against that too. Even if you don't have open source hardware, you can have tamper evident packaging, basically, which, for instance, Nitro Keys, a German company that's selling these FIDO keys, security keys, but they're also selling ThinkPad laptops and Graphene OS phones, and they can send them to you in a tamper evident packaging, basically. So they will put seals on all the screws, and they will take pictures of all those seals and send those to you in a secure manner, or end-to-end encrypted, so that when it's sent to you, you can actually compare it. They will. There's also a way to put a seal to wrap an entire laptop, for instance, in this seal that has a pattern, and the pattern is unique. So they will take a picture of that pattern, let's say a pattern of circles that are colored differently, and then you can compare one to one if it matches. So all of that is something that people who are in that threat model can do. So if people are worried that, there's always another attack vector, that will probably always be the case. We'll probably never escape that fact. But that doesn't mean that whatever you do doesn't count. All of it counts. Even if you just switch to Session, Signal, Proton Mail, it all counts, even if you are on the iPhone or standard Android. If you can go to Graphene OS, that's even better. And again, I also agree, like, it's a stack. If you want full comprehensive coverage, you gotta have to do all of these steps one by one at some point. But any sort of data minimization counts, not just for your privacy, but also for removing the power of the incumbent companies, these monopolies, and their powerful corporate structures. I would also really like to plug this Accrescent thing. I mean, I'm not sponsored by any of these people. I have never been actually sponsored on my channel. But I really want to. I like Accrescent. You can check it out if you want to. I know that Session is on F-Droid. Maybe you can pitch this to the Session Foundation or whoever makes these decisions. But I feel like that what Accrescent is doing is really like the proper way to do an app store, because it's pretty secure. It gives developers control over their own keys, meaning that the users are also always consenting. They don't have to, go through that platform consent again, as they have to with Google. And again, it's very small, so I'm pitching it here to get more developers interested, and lots of developers are going to be listening to this, so hopefully they will check it out. And maybe it's going to be nothing, but hopefully it will take off at some point.
Yeah, I'll definitely have a look into it. Sounds very interesting.
Oh, okay. I've never talked to those people either. I would have to reach out to them, but at least that sounds like something that could be the future of app distribution. But maybe my understanding is completely off here, but I don't think that is the case at this point, at least. Do you have anything else that you would like to mention?
No, I mean, like, if you're interested in Session, you can just go to getsession.org, and Session is on all platforms, so Mac, Windows, Linux, iOS, Android. We have lots of different methods of distribution, so you can get the app and run it basically on anything, and download it directly from us as well. So if that's something that you're concerned about, we have methods around that as well. So if you like, and you can send me a message as well. I think all my information is public online, so if you just Google my name, you'll probably be able to find my Session contact information. So send me a message if anything in this little interview kind of piqued your interest, and check it out as well.
And what if people want to become node operators? Where can they find the information on that?
Yeah, so if you go to the Session website, getsession.org, I think there's a banner on the website which takes you to some of the token information, and there's some docs pages there. It's the hardware requirements aren't massive right now, because you're mainly just relaying messages and data, which is not a lot of overhead. So yeah, it's pretty easy to get involved in the node network as well. Obviously, there is that financial stake that we talked about before, so that might turn you off. But if you're interested in the crypto side of things as well, you can get involved there too.
Well, thank you very much for the talk. I'm really happy that we did this, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to come out of Session, the new things and all the stuff.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Have a good one.
You too.